This is Corinne.
And this is Ayani.
And this is Sex, Love, Literature, a pop culture podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sex, Love, Literature. We are super excited to have you for our fourth episode, in which we are going to dive into one of our favorite television shows from this last year. If you couldn't tell from some of our other episodes, Corinne and I have been watching a lot of TV.
Yeah, I'm sure we're not alone in this.
Yeah.
I hope we're not alone in this.
I know, right? It's just us. It's just us watching all this TV. Netflix has become one of our dear friends over the course of the last 7 months. But before we dive into things, I just want to remind everyone that if you're enjoying your time with us here at Sex Love Literature, don't forget to find us on Instagram and Twitter at SexLoveLit, all one word, and to follow us on the platform of your choice, Spotify, iTunes, all those other little sound aggregates that are out there. But yeah, so before we really dive into things, Corinne, how are you doing, bud? How are you?
I'm very tired.
That is very fair. It's like a rainy, gross day here in Florida.
And we have a hurricane coming our way on November 9th.
Yeah.
Which is when we're recording this.
Yeah. As if this last week wasn't enough of a stressful time, we also have a incoming hurricane. So that's fun. That's fun.
This is fine. It's fine.
It's all fine. Or to be on brand, it's okay. I'm sorry, that was really bad.
Well, on that note, today we are talking about the Korean drama, It's Okay to Not Be Okay. The reason we are talking about a Korean drama is because I have become very obsessed with Korean dramas.
So Corinne has yet again bullied me into watching another show, which is fine. I thought it was fantastic. But still, this is all Corinne.
But I started watching Korean dramas in July, and I have now watched 22 of them.
Which is so wild to me. Every time you say it. Jesus.
But my favorite is Crash Landing on You, which I am too emotionally invested in to discuss in a rational manner. So instead, we are talking about It's Okay to Not Be Okay, which is on Netflix.
Yeah. That it is. Yeah. How long ago did we watch this the first time?
I think we watched it pretty soon. So it aired on Netflix and in South Korea from June 20th to August 9th. We didn't start watching it until it had finished airing because episodes dropped as they aired. So normally for Korean dramas, 2 episodes air at a time. Like one will air on Friday and one on Saturday. I don't remember what days of the week this one aired on, but it aired for 8 weeks. We didn't want to start watching it until it was all there because cliffhangers abound.
Very true.
But also to give you a little bit of context about the way Korean dramas normally work, they normally are set up to be just one season. So the show is 16 episodes long, and it tells a complete story and was written and designed that way to, like, when they started, they already knew how it would end. And you can definitely tell that in, like, the tightness of the storytelling a lot of the time. Like, it doesn't linger on the way that American shows perhaps sometimes tend to, because they never know when they're going to get canceled.
Yeah. And honestly, it's part of the reason why Corinne has been able to get me to watch so many K-dramas this era. I don't know. That's not the right word, but it's what we'll go with.
The era of 2020.
The era of 2020, right? Because sometimes it can be hard to commit to a longer show right now. So when she's like, it's only 16 episodes and each one's about an hour, I'm like, okay, I can do that. I think I can do that. I have not watched nearly as many as Corinne has.
What are you at 3?
Yeah, because I've watched It's Okay.
Crash Landing on You.
Crash Landing. Bonus Book. Romance is a Bonus Book. And I started Korean Odyssey, but didn't finish that one. I think I'm at 3 because I can't think of any others that I'm watching right now.
Yeah. I mean, I will no doubt bully her into watching more in the future. But
we started Extraordinary You.
Yes, I love Extraordinary You.
But Let's stay on
That's
topic.
not what we're talking about. Today we are talking about it's okay to not be okay. So the reason we decided to watch It's Okay together is because from just the description of it, it sounded really interesting, and that did indeed pan out. So It's Okay to Not Be Okay is about a children's book author with antisocial personality disorder. And I was a little bit hesitant about this one before we started watching it, honestly, because I thought it sounded fluffy from the name. This show is anything but fluffy.
Yeah, that is not the adjective that I would use.
No. But like, because I do have this interest in children's literature, since that is what I study and spend my life talking about, it seemed like something that was definitely worth a shot. And I know after we watched the first episode, we were so hooked, like immediately.
Yeah, it did not take much. Like usually with television shows, I'll give them 3 episodes. And if I'm hooked in 3 episodes, I'll keep going. But with this, after the first one, we looked at each other and we're like, oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, and it's also like, it's a really, really visually stunning show with some really interesting cinematography choices. The soundtrack is beautiful. And it actually opens with like a stop motion claymation sequence.
Yeah.
Which like when we started, since Aeoni specializes in animation, we were both like, wait, who tricked who into watching this show?
Very fair. Very fair. I mean, it was, I think that was part of the reason why I was hooked so quickly, though, because it threw us off right from the start. We weren't even, because I think It's Okay was the third one that I watched. So I was not expecting things to start off that way. And because it threw us for such a loop, we were pulled in instantly, so to speak.
Well, and so Aeoni is going to give you a rundown of the characters, but like it also it starts with this animation sequence with sort of a fairy tale setup, like a fairy tale version of what is happening. But it's a very dark fairy tale. It's more along the lines of like the original Grimm fairy tales that are like not happy. And it's
talk about an understatement.
But so it uses fairy tales and children's stories as a lens through which to interpret a lot of the things happening on the screen. But before we dive into that, Aeon is going to tell you who we're talking about.
Oh, am I?
You are.
So there are quite a few characters. The main protagonist, our heroine, is Ko Moon-young. She is the children's book author that Corinne mentioned. Her love interest is Moon Gang-tae, who is a very attractive gentleman. It's important. Not quite what you need to know about his character, though. He's
also, side note, he's like, think I saw something that said he's the highest paid K-drama actor right now. Like, he got paid more per episode for It's Okay, even than, like, the main actors in Crash Landing got paid.
Really?
And it was his comeback after his 2 years of mandatory military service as well.
Oh, okay. Well, look at that. But he is a caretaker at the OK psychiatric hospital, or he gets to that point as the story goes on. His brother is Moon Sang-tae, who is a very interesting character that we're going to be thinking about a little bit later in the podcast. His brother is autistic, and that was something that I know Corinne and I were paying close attention to as the narrative went on, because we were both, I guess, a little on edge about how the characterization was going to work, if they were going to play into obvious stereotypes, or how the character would unfold. So
it's also interesting to note that Moon Sang-tae is older than Gang-tae. So he's I think 35,
right,
and Gang-tae is like several years younger. So there's this sort of interesting power dynamic in that the older brother is the one that societally would be expected to have less, agency.
Right. And I think Gang-tae and Moon-young are both in their 30s, like early 30s. So that's something that's fun to think about too, at least for me in my 30s. Next, we have Namjuri, who is a childhood friend of Gang-tae and Moon-young's. I stress friend because that's one of the complicated issues that's dealt with in the show. But she is delightful. She is also a
She's a nurse, I think.
Yeah, she's a nurse who works at the OK Psychiatric Hospital. Her mom also is a major character. I don't think we're going to be talking about her mom too much, but she is a delight and is an actress that Corinne is now following through a series of K-dramas. From there, we have Lee Sang-in, who is Moon-young's editor. He runs, what is it? Sang-sang-i-sang, publishing company that goes under over the course of the series.
And like it's Moon-young's fault.
Yeah, it's Moon-young's fault. And his assistant, Yoo Seung-jae, right, is his assistant. She's also a delight, and I want her entire wardrobe throughout the show. And last but not least, we have Jo Jae-soo, who is Gang-tae's best friend, who literally follows him from town to town and does not get enough love in the series, if you ask me. And he is actually played by one of our favorite actors from Romance is a Bonus Book. And this is a slightly different role. He still does the comedic thing, but I think
he's still a little goofy.
Yeah, but more serious in this role, I think, given more heavy hitting lines and weight and all that. And there are a variety of interesting characters that are at the OK Psychiatric Hospital, from doctors and other nurses to the patients that are there. We're likely not going to talk very much about them here, but one of the things that we love about this show is the rich ensemble cast. So excellent. That's kind of who we're looking at, who's on the playing field for us in It's Okay. But yeah, do we want to start by thinking about fairy tales and how they're used?
Yeah, I think thinking both about fairy tales and children's stories and how they're used, as well as how this K-dramas in general, but this one in particular, is playing with genre and with our genre expectations. So when we were thinking about what genre the show is, it is, I think, first and foremost a romantic melodrama. Everything is very over the top. There is like a romance that's very, very central to the story, but there's also a lot of other layers going on. What are some of those that you see?
Okay, so you said a romantic melodrama. Well, we've got a little bit of murder mystery that sneaks its way in there.
So Gang-tae and Sang-tae's mother was murdered when they were a child, and Sang-tae was the only witness and wasn't really able to tell people what had happened, so they don't know who killed her.
Yeah, and his trauma is actually a major part of the show as it unfolds. So we have that. We also have a little bit of like, what would it be called? Medical drama? Medical
almost
comedy?
Like a hospital show, because in a number of episodes, there's almost that episodic like patient per episode story. So it's like not like Grey's Anatomy where they're like dealing with someone with like, I don't know, appendicitis or something. But it is like dealing with someone's particular like mental issues. Like sometimes it's depression, sometimes it's alcoholism, sometimes like there's a character who was abused by her ex-husband. There's a character whose daughter died and she can't process that. Like there's a lot. There's a character with post-traumatic stress disorder from which war? The Vietnam War, I think.
I want to say the Korean War.
I think it's the Vietnam
was it the Vietnam War?
Because the Korean War was too long ago for that.
Okay. Yes, you are right. You are right. I know dates.
But there is that layer of like thinking about mental health, and it takes trauma, both of our main characters and of the patients in the hospital, very, very seriously as a show.
And did we say romantic comedy? Because some of it is very silly.
Oh yeah, there's definitely the elements of comedy to it.
Yeah. I think those are all the ones that I can think of. Did I miss any?
I don't think so. But then circling back to like this question of using fairy tales as a lens through which to view the show, so Ko Moon-young writes what are described as dark fairy tales. And a lot of the episodes are named after either Ko Moon-young's books or after like actual fairy tales. So like one of them, for example, is called The Girl Who Cried Wolf, and an allusion to Ko Moon-young instead of The Boy Who Cried Wolf. I was so on edge that whole episode waiting for her to like die. I don't know. I was very concerned something bad was going to happen to her. But then there's some that are like named after her books, which then like a lot of the times they'll then have like an animated sequence of like her book, like The Monkfish, or do you remember?
Or Zombie Kid. Zombie Kid was one of them. And then
The smiling dog or the cheerful dog?
yeah, the cheerful dog was one. So there are these interesting ways that both real fairy tales and then
Mhm.
in universe fairy tales are woven together. Though I guess because you can buy these books, they're technically also real,
Mhm.
but they're not by Ko Moon-young, the character, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, there's this interesting play with both fairy tale in structuring the narrative. I think another
Mhm.
one was The Red Shoes. There was also Beauty and the Beast, I think was one of
Mhm.
the episode titles. But even in the narrative, there's this use of fairy tale imagery. There, as we gestured to when we started talking, animated sequences that
Mhm.
are shown to have just as much weight and importance as the live action sequences. There was one I remember that was all in black and white. That was the story of two brothers that unfolded on the bottom of the screen, which I think was a
Mhm.
really interesting decision. There was still, if I'm remembering correctly, live action images in the background, but then that animation was in the foreground, and that's what you ended up paying attention to.
Mhm.
So just a shout out to one of our colleagues really quickly. One of our friends, Zach Shaw, is working on a dissertation and thinking about how animation is used to convey emotional reactions to things.
Mm.
And he was the first person that I thought of when we were watching this opening of It's Okay, because there's so much about the emotional unpacking that's going to happen over the course of the narrative in just that first, what is it even, like 3 minutes?
It
If
might be
that,
5.
it might be five. Well, 5 minutes. That 5 minute sequence that speak to both trauma and what Ko Moon-young is dealing with throughout the show, what Gang-tae is dealing with throughout the show.
Mhm.
That to me is absolutely fascinating and beautiful.
But in particular, what's important here when we're thinking about romance and sex love literature is how Ko Moon-young is not a fairy tale princess.
Right.
She is instead set up as the monster and almost as like the
Mm-hmm.
witch. Because like in this opening sequence, we see her with a box full of like butterflies that she has torn up and that she
Dead
like
birds.
and she's very frightening. So like what then a question that we're thinking about is like what happens when our heroine, our leading
Mm-hmm.
lady is coded as a monster? What does that do
Yeah.
to our interpretation of her? And like how much do we root for her? How much does she unsettle us? Like what's going on there?
Yeah, and this is something that really spoke to me based on my research, right, and what I'm doing and thinking about monstrosity and monstrous women specifically, is that even though we're set up to be unsettled by Ko Moon-young, we still are made to root for her. She's still
Mhm.
our one of our main perspective characters that we are coming into the show through. The fact that this animated sequence literally transitions to a shot of her standing on this dilapidated balcony as a grown woman lets
Mhm.
us know that we're going to be placing this focus on her and following her journey throughout the narrative. So even though she's set up as a monster, and even though she's unsettling to us, we're still following the cues of the show, supposed to like her
Mhm.
and supposed to be rooting for her and paying attention to her. So I think it's an interesting dichotomy,
Mhm.
perhaps.
Well, and something that so I've watched the show through twice, and something that for reasons. But something that happened the first time that didn't happen as much the second time is I was constantly on edge, waiting for Moon Young to maybe do something that was unforgivable, that would not
Mhm.
allow me to root for her anymore. So even though she does, like, she's very, very angry a lot of the time. She yells a lot. She doesn't have reasonable
Yeah.
boundaries. She's very, very compulsive. In
Mhm.
fact, one of the most striking visual sequences in the first episode is like when she meets Moon Gang-tae, and she almost gets choked to death by a patient. It's a whole deal.
It's the
But then,
whole thing.
but then she goes to stab the patient, and Moon Gang-tae stops her, but she ends up like he catches the knife in his hand, and it's this really, really beautiful but unsettling shot of Moon Gang-tae holding the knife with blood dripping down his arm, and Ko Moon-young holding the handle of the knife, like with her arm raised, and them just like looking at each other while the camera circles them, and like dramatic music plays. And they're also like backstage at a theater where Ko Moon-young was doing a reading, so there's like set pieces behind, and it says like "Welcome to Wonderland" in a lit up sign behind them. But like that is both visually stunning and terrifying.
Yeah, and to be that person that makes that comment, this is the second time they've interacted, and we already have some kind of a would we call it a oh god, what's the word I want? Not psychological, not psychiatric. Let's go with Freudian. That's not what the one I wanted. It's a completely different strain. But we already have this like Freudian allusion to penetration between the two of them. And they're also staring very deeply into each other's eyes.
Also, a side note, both of their eyes are so beautiful. And also, like, I'm very, very jealous of Ko Moon-young's eye makeup. It is beautiful. And also her costumes, her hat, her hair, everything about her look is like, she looks like a fairy tale character a lot of the time. She dresses so dramatically. But she's a very, very dramatic person.
Yeah. I mean, they're both gorgeous.
Oh, yeah, they're both gorgeous.
It's unfair sometimes how gorgeous some people are. But that's neither here nor there. Where were we going? Oh, yes. Yeah, so that kind of opening sequence, I think you can already see all of the different layers that are happening in this show. Because part of what Ko Moon-young is going through, and I keep calling her by her full name, but part of what Moon-young is going through is her relationship with her parents. And in that choking sequence, we have flashbacks to when her father tried to choke her as a child. Choking comes up a lot. There's a lot of choking that happens in this show. I mean, not that we can cover this, but I think it might be worth at some point thinking through how violence works in this narrative. Because there's a lot of stabbings and chokings and murderings that happen. But we've got Ko Moon-young's relationship to her parents that comes up. We have our main couple and their kind of dramatic tension that is unpacked over the course of the show, but also how they play off of each other in their intensity. I don't know if anyone else besides Gang-tae could handle Moon-young and kind of because of both of their journeys that they need to go on and how they process. Yeah, it's really gorgeous. I wish we could like show you. But podcasting is an auditory medium, so there we are.
But moving then into like thinking further about the development of Ko Moon-young and Moon Gang-tae's relationship, something that so my students watched this and we talked about it in quarantine book club, which we've been doing because I make many people watch K-dramas in my life.
Yeah, not just me.
But something that they were, I think, very justifiably uncomfortable with is that Ko Moon-young is so aggressive and doesn't, especially at the beginning of the show, does not really respect boundaries very well. And I do think that's in part because she doesn't understand boundaries and doesn't care to understand them. So that isn't in part a choice on her part. But like she did have a very traumatic childhood growing up. Her father had early onset dementia because as a result of brain cancer, and her mother is a
murderess.
Is complicated, but has disappeared since she was very young. So she essentially raised herself in this very interesting and unsettling way. But then because Moon Gang-tae is like such a, and then we'll think about this a little bit more, but he like takes care of his brother and is very, very responsible and has boundaries that are perhaps too rigid. When you throw Ko Moon-young and Moon Gang-tae together, especially because Moon-young like kind of stalks him a little bit, and she has this very, very beautifully stunning but deeply unsettling sequence at the end of episode 2 where she after this like whole stabbing incident when Moon Gang-tae like basically disappears, gets a new job, she follows him and has a monologue about red shoes in an allusion to Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale about the red shoes, which is not a super well-known one, but like it ends with her saying that like obsession is noble and beautiful,
right?
Which is scary, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think that's part of why I really liked this show, is that all of the characters, and at least our main characters, are so very complex and complicated. I remember one of the things your students talked about, because I also hang out in the quarantine book club sometimes. One of the things your students talked about was not necessarily liking her at the beginning and being so unsettled by her and not being sure where it was going to go. And I think we don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about that, but the unlikability perhaps of our protagonist is worth noting, because her growth is one of the major aspects of this show. And I think the creators worked very hard to make us unsettled by her, to not make us immediately like her. Because so much of the show is about growth and change and development. Characters have so far to go, so to speak, from episode 1 to episode 16.
Well, and also, like, on the other hand, one of the things that I love about Ko Moon-young is that she is so angry and and yells so much, and like she's not demure, she's not quiet, she's not she's the opposite of those things.
Right.
And women so often do not get to be those things, particularly in like these sweeping love stories.
Yeah. And that's actually something, plugging my dissertation again, that monster women do, is that they push against some of these societal, I'm putting quotes around this, right? Because it's all, we're not doing deep dive conversations here, but these kind of societal expectations of what a woman is supposed to be. Because a lot of times, to point to, was it Jeffrey Jerome Cohen? Monsters break boundaries. They show us, quote unquote, how to not behave. But if we make them our protagonists and our heroes, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, I don't care about how you think I should behave. But also being around people, interacting with people, can show us how to treat one another and how to, relate to one another, even if we don't necessarily change what makes us special and what makes us who we are. So I think Ko Moon-young is definitely a monstrous woman, so to speak, in her depiction here. But I also do love that she's kind of fiery and mad,
Well, and something else that is really fun is that she's the more sexually aggressive of the two of them.
You think that's fun?
I think it's so funny because, like, and again, this does like something to think about is like if we're tracking the power dynamics and the dynamics of consent in their relationship, Ko Moon-young is definitely doing the most and possibly too much at the beginning. But like when she like will like yell at Moon Gang-tae like, "Do you want to sleep with me?" Like at his place of work.
Yeah, that's not appropriate.
No, it's not appropriate.
Listeners, don't do that. Don't do that.
But also, it was really funny on the show.
I think one of my favorite moments like that, though, is when they were in the supermarket and she's like, "Yeah, I've decided you can give me a son." And he's like, "Excuse? What?" And then people in the background are like, "Oh, maybe he doesn't want to have a son. I don't understand."
Well, and like this is after they've had this whole conversation where she's like, "I absolutely do not want children. No, thank you." And then like half an hour later, she's like, "No, give me a son right now."
Yeah, right. If it's a little you, I can handle it. And he's like, "What? You just okay." Yeah, she's a whirlwind.
But then that again, that's more okay at that point because their relationship. So a lot of what sort of has to happen here is Ko Moon-young has to learn boundaries and how to control her compulsive behavior. Yeah. And Moon Gang-tae both has to learn how to stop being a liar.
A lying liar.
Because he lies to people to try and protect them, which causes more problems than it prevents. But he also has to learn how to let go of some of his more rigid boundaries in order to like have fun and be a person and not have his whole existence circle around his brother. So like a lot of the show is about these two characters finding a healthy medium both between the two of them and including Moon Gang-tae's brother, Sang-tae.
Yeah. And I think we should definitely talk about Sang-tae because so much of the show is about their triangular relationship. But just a quick note, I'm bouncing off something you said. I think one of the things that's so great about this show is, and I know all narratives are about the journey, right? But something that they're hammering home through the fact that they're at a psychiatric hospital, through the fact that the doctors are kind of major players in the cast, the fact that Gang-tae is also one of the staff members here, is that the process is important. And these characters are not perfect from the beginning, but that doesn't mean that they can't grow and develop and change. But that also doesn't mean that who you are is a bad thing. There, I think, are so many patients who they have to kind of accept certain parts of who they are in order to move forward and heal.
I think that's definitely true. Although I think the show is also careful not to suggest that you have to then accept all abusive behavior and forgive people for hurting you. It is still very much in favor of, like, particularly with the character who is abused by her ex-husband, or like a character who is abused by her father,
sold by her father to a shaman.
Yeah, it's a whole and who like comes back and like wants her kidney. Like, she doesn't have to forgive him for that. And that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I know that we only have so much time to talk about this show on the podcast, right? But it's really doing so much work. You could, I mean, not that I'm going to do this, but you could really like put together a whole special collection about the things that are happening in this show.
Yeah, you're definitely not going to be the person to do that.
No, because you are. This is your job. But yeah, why don't we think about Sang-tae, Gang-tae, and Moon-young a little bit? Because even though there's not a sexy relationship between Sang-tae and his brother, right? Or Moon-young, it's not that kind of a show. I think thinking about that relationship is important in a show that is so focused on the relationships that we build with one another.
Well, and like building on that, one of the big tropes about the show that I really love, and that I love in K-dramas in general, is like the found family aspect of it. Like, because these three people who are in a lot of ways very traumatized and very broken from the things they experienced in their childhood, and from like either losing their family members or having families that didn't treat them well, still find a family that can love them and support them.
Yeah. There's, not to jump ahead, but there is a fantastic episode that's really focused on the three of them becoming family. And there's some very key imagery from that shows up throughout the show of them under umbrellas together. They take a family photo.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In which one of my favorite tropes of a sexy man hair flip when so I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast yet, but I've noticed a trend that extends beyond K-dramas. But if a man has his hair down, like has bangs in his normal look, at some point when it's time for his hot man transformation, when he puts on a suit, the bangs are getting swept away and you're going to see forehead. And I've been calling it the magical forehead. I'm going to look on TV tropes to see if this is a thing that's actually there. But the magic forehead trope was definitely in play with our boy Gang-tae.
I feel like we legitimately like had to take a moment when Moon Gang-tae showed up like in a suit with his hair like back. we were both like, whoa. Like, we knew he was hot, but like did not know that hot. Anyway,
it's the hair magic. It's the forehead magic. Magical foreheads. Quote me on it. But one of the most important relationships in this show is this triangular relationship between Sang-tae, Gang-tae, and Moon-young. So I talked to your students a little bit about this too, but I was really impressed with how Sang-tae's character was handled throughout the course of the narrative, in that they did not just make him into a flat kind of stereotype, if that makes sense, that he had character development and growth and changes that he needed to make just as much as everyone else needed to make. So one of the things that's important about Sang-tae is that he's an artist. He's an illustrator, I should say. And he and Moon-young develop this kind of funky friendship relationship in which he is going to be an illustrator for her upcoming book that she is also struggling to write throughout the course of the narrative. So a lot of Sang-tae's growth and development is tied to his career almost as an illustrator.
Well, and because a lot of, I think, what is happening in the show, and also what the show is asking of viewers, is there are assumptions that we make and that I made about like decisions that Sang-tae can or should be allowed to make for himself. Like when he signs a contract with Ko Moon-young to be her illustrator, it is readers, viewers, I think, I know I felt very uncomfortable about Ko Moon-young perhaps manipulating him into this in order to hang on to Gang-tae in a way that was unhealthy. And that
Right.
that part is still not great. But like then Gang-tae has this discussion with Juri's mother, who like drops some maternal wisdom in there about, instead of being like, oh, like this is so horrible, Ko Moon-young is taking advantage of him, she then sort of reframes it as, oh, what a great opportunity for him. I'm so glad someone is seeing that and taking him seriously.
Yeah. So, building on that, I think one of the things that the show does very well is forcing us as viewers to examine our biases and our expectations of these different characters. But also, and this I think is a really difficult line to watch, and walk. And I would be curious if people disagree with us here. But for some of the actions in the show does not overtly celebrate or condemn them. It kind of offers, I don't want, and it's not both sidesism, right? If something is bad, if someone like chokes their daughter out, they're not like, well, maybe they had a reason to do it, right? But in this moment, for example, when Sang-tae signs the contract, it's like, okay, there are these parts that perhaps are unsettling and that we want to think about, but there's also positives that come out of it. So there is this play in the gray area that I think the show does well in a way that avoids kind of like whataboutism in a way that's detrimental or unhelpful, especially with Sang-tae.
Well, and like something that the show does a really good job of respecting and thinking about, so is that even though Gang-tae has done the best that he could to take care of Sang-tae over the 15 years, I think, since their mother was murdered, like
they were really little.
It's so sad.
It's so sad.
It's so tragic. But their relationship has sort of stagnated in a way that isn't working for either of them.
Right.
Because they have to move every year because of nightmares that Sang-tae has about butterflies, because of reasons that we won't get into because we're not going to spoil the murder mystery for you.
Oops.
We won't, but it's not spoiled all the way. There are many twists and turns. This is a K-drama. But their relationship isn't, it's semi-functional, but it is not healthy. They are not as happy as they could be. And it's almost like throwing Ko Moon-young into the mix to unsettle Gang-tae's sort of over caretaking kinds of ways. Like, and he accepts a lot of abuse from his brother that with like the excuse of like, oh, like that's just how it is. But like Sang-tae at the same time shouldn't be able to hit Gang-tae or whatever. Like that's not okay.
Yeah. And go ahead. Sorry.
I'm not sure where I was going. Go ahead.
And I think the key too is that Sang-tae knows that he's not right for doing these things because he doesn't do it to anyone else. He only does it to Gang-tae. And part of that is because of some of the pent-up traumas that they have that they haven't been addressing that come out in these kind of devastating ways. So just as a really quick recap, when they were little, I want to say Gang-tae was maybe like 7 and Sang-tae was 10, something like that.
I think Sang-tae is like 5 years older than Gang-tae. Okay. So I think like 14 maybe, and 9-ish.
Yeah, 10 and 15, something like that. Sang-tae fell into a hole in a lake where the ice was thin. And for a second, Gang-tae considers not helping him because his life would be easier if his brother was gone. And it's a very short thing, and he's a little boy. And this is, I think, one of those moments where it's like, this is what happened. I'm not, the series is not going to place a judgment call on him, but this is also something that they both have had to wrestle with over the course of the last 15 years. And then Gang-tae does go back and get Sang-tae out of the hole. But then in doing that, he has to go in himself. And then Sang-tae kind of
runs away.
The scene and runs away.
And then Ko Moon-young is the one to actually, she doesn't pull Gang-tae out of the water, but she gives him like a flotation device to be able to get himself out.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. It looked like a piece of styrofoam, but I'm not going to ask questions.
The point is that she saved his life.
Right. But that's actually something that Sang-tae has been carrying around with him and has not addressed with his brother.
Mm-hmm.
And that has kind of been coding his actions with Gang-tae since then. So this is one of those things, thinking about trauma, that they need to, I don't want to say move past because that's kind of pedantic, but that they need to come to terms with. They need to look at in its face rather than burying it deep down and pretending it didn't happen or that the other has forgotten about it.
Well, and then one of the things that the show is thinking about and that like it comes back to a lot is that like Gang-tae does not belong to Sang-tae, Gang-tae belongs to Gang-tae. And I think there's like a clever Korean phrase that they're actually saying that doesn't translate as well into English from having watched it. But like it's like Gang-tae belongs to Gang-tae, Sang-tae belongs to Sang-tae, and Moon-young belongs to Moon-young. And Gang-tae also does not belong to Moon-young.
Moon-young, right.
Like they each have to belong to themselves and like get right with themselves before they can have satisfying and healthy and balanced relationships with other people.
Yeah. And I know you said we're not going to spoil the murder mystery, but I want to spoil this one thing.
Okay.
The story wraps up with the book that Sang-tae and Moon-young create together, which is pretty much
so beautiful.
Oh, it's so beautiful. But it's the story of the three of them and how their faces had been stolen by an evil witch. And they, in order to, as you said, Corinne, get right by themselves, have to find their true faces. But also speaks to how their special personalities allow them to help other people and allow them to exist. So it's not just like, and they've been completely reborn and now they're brand new, but it's more about, I guess, healing.
And like finding balance through, like they balance each other out in really productive ways.
Yeah,
like they have to meet in the middle instead of going too far to any one of them. It's almost like you put all three of them in like like shook them up together and then like pour them out again and then they're like in the right spots. That's not a very good metaphor.
I'm gonna let it rock though.
I don't know. but like Ko Moon-young had to learn to be less impulsive. Gang-tae had to learn almost to be more impulsive. Like they had to meet in the middle in all of those circumstances.
Yeah. And Sang-tae and Ko Moon-young also had to kind of reach an equilibrium with each other. Largely in their relationship to Gang-tae, but also in their reactions and relations to each other, because they do develop this kind of best friend relationship, which I think is great.
And it's an unironic best friendship. They really are best friends. That's not just like pandering.
Yeah. And they have their kind of rocky moments too throughout the show. But I think thinking about it as an equilibrium is a really smart way to go. Look at you. But do we want to scoot a little bit away here and maybe think about some of the other relationships, some of the other characters?
So, as in most K-dramas, because we do have these 16 episodes that are an hour and some change long, there are often very well-developed ensemble casts. So, while we can't pay attention to everyone, there are a few that we also want to consider, particularly because in a lot of K-dramas, there's like the A couple, which here would obviously be Ko Moon-young and Moon Gang-tae, which their couple name, by the way, is Moon Moon. It's so funny. Anyway, that's not important. But there's often a B couple, which in this case is Juri and Ko Moon-young's editor, Lee Sung-in. What do we think of them, Ayani?
Oh, I like them. So for a little, to quote Corinne, for a little bit of backstory, a little bit of background, or context, that's what you say, for a little bit of context. Judy has had a crush on Gang-tae for the last 15 years.
Okay, actually, I don't know if she knew Moon Gang-tae as a child. I know they had the same hometown, but like I think she only got a crush on him when they worked in the same hospital.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah, like as adults. Okay.
I thought it was a childhood thing, but all right. She's had a crush on him for a long time. And it's very clear that it's kind of a one-sided crush. This is not a mutual attraction kind of situation. But Judy also had a very kind of rocky relationship with Moon-young as children, in that Moon-young befriended Juri as like I think Juri was bullied or something like that.
Juri
So
was
then,
being bullied, and everyone was afraid of Ko Moon-young because she's always been sort of ethereal and witchy almost.
mhm,
And a lot of that is because of the way her mother was almost grooming her to be.
right,
But like because all of the other children were afraid of Ko Moon-young when she showed up for Juri, it made the other children back off. But it made the other
right,
children back off, and Juri didn't want just one friend. She wanted to be friends with everyone. So
right.
they
So
parted on bad terms as
yeah,
children.
yeah. Which I think Judy perhaps remembered a little bit, not more harshly, but perhaps did not see why she was in the wrong
Mhm.
in the circumstance. So she kind of always just did not like, I don't want to say she'd go as far as hated Ko Moon-young, but there was definitely bad blood there, to say the
Yeah.
least. So the thing that the jury that Jury goes on, the journey that Jury goes on is one kind of redeveloping a relationship with Ko Moon-young, but also letting go of her crush on Gang-tae.
Mhm.
I think one of the moments that he actually doesn't lie to save somebody's feelings is when he tells her, that
Mhm.
he's not interested.
Mhm.
However, and actually, Judy is an interesting foil to Ko Moon-young because I
Yeah.
think she is very much set up in a lot of ways as like the prim and proper sweet nurse.
Mhm.
And I think other people put that on her some
Mhm.
ways. But when she drinks, that's when she feels like she can really let go and she gets a little angry, let's
Mhm.
say. So one of the things that Judy, I guess one of the ways she develops is kind of not feeling like she needs to keep everything under wraps all the time, constantly. And part of that process is this relationship that she develops with Ko Moon-young's editor, which I thought was very sweet because
Mhm.
and I always it's Sangin, right?
Lee Sung-in.
Yeah, Lee Sangin and Ko Moon-young have a very interesting relationship
Mhm.
where Ko Moon-young will go do something wild. She pushes a man down the stairs, for example,
He
but
totally deserved it though.
yeah, I'm not gonna say he didn't because to keep her mental not her mental health
Antisocial
a secret.
personality disorder, a
Thank
secret.
you.
He tries to blackmail her into sleeping with him. So she
Yes.
pushes him down the stairs, and like I'm not mad at that.
He doesn't die, so it's not murder. Just want to point that out. But her editor is constantly like covering up for that by giving people money,
Mhm.
which is part of the reason why the company goes bankrupt after Ko Moon-young's book releases. It gets bad press because people think it's too dark, and that
Mhm.
kind of causes, if I'm remembering correctly, causes the company to fold. So he actually ends up in this same kind of a podunk town
Mhm.
that everyone else is in.
Where actually Juri is the one who got Moon Gang-tae the job there.
Right, right.
And then
And this is
Moon Gang-tae and his brother Moon Song-tae are live with Juri and her mother like
right,
as renters.
right. And this is the town that they all grew up in. So it doesn't seem like Judy really left,
Mhm. Or
right?
she might have.
Left and then
I
come back,
think she
perhaps.
worked in Seoul for a year, maybe. Or she left to work at the hospital where she met Moon Gang-tae,
Ah,
and then
okay.
went
Yeah, yeah,
back home
yeah.
to live with her mother.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Where was I going with this? Oh, yeah. So the editor is now in this town and he kind of develops this massive crush on Judy.
Mhm.
So he's kind of in a very opposite way of Moon Young, pursuing her. And
Mhm.
one of the moments that's absolutely hilarious between the two of them is that they're both at different tables at an outside kind of bar, outside of a convenience store,
Mhm.
having some soju. And they're both complaining about Ko Moon Young and don't realize
Mhm.
it. But then he turns to Judy and starts talking to her, and she like tells him off, and
Mhm.
he ends up bringing her home drunk
Well, and
to his mother.
one of the things that is really interesting about the conversation is that and again, we're working off of the English subtitles here, so I don't know
Right.
precisely what was happening in the Korean, but like Juri is like, I want to be a bitch. Why does everyone like the bitch? Like, why can't I be like that?
And I mean, if I remember correctly, he was pretty much like, you don't have to be a bitch.
Mhm.
That's okay. You don't have to be Ko Moon Young. You can be yourself. Um,
Mhm.
and that it is important to be yourself, even if that is a kind of quieter you know, person, a
And
quieter version.
and that works particularly, circling back, it does set up Juri really well as a foil to Ko Moon-young's over the
Yeah.
topness, like in all aspects of her life.
Right. But I think that's part of what I like about Judy and Sangin is that it's kind of to the kind of bombastic nature of Ko
Mhm.
Moon-young and Moon Gang-tae. It's a much quieter,
Mhm.
slowly developed relationship in which I don't want to say they not redeem each other, but they're kind of both moving through the changes in their relationship with the
Mhm.
A couple because Ko Moon-young has not been the nicest to her editor over the course of this,
Mhm.
you know?
But also he, I think, is patronizing to her a lot of the time. And
Mhm.
in order to work their relationship also, I think, needed to be rebalanced.
Yeah. There's a lot of rebalancing that's just happening
Mhm.
throughout this entire show. Um, but yeah, what about their relationship, the B couple, really stood out to you?
I think I liked it because it was almost softer. Like
Mhm.
it was just a lot quieter, and it was almost a lot like I'm never gonna be a Ko Moon-young, but I could be a Juri, if that makes sense. I don't know, it's almost more relatable. Not that being
Okay.
relatable makes something relatability isn't the be all end all here,
Oh, no, of course not.
but it is, I think, helpful to have two ends of the spectrum, and that even though Lee
Mhm.
Sung-ying is often over the top in a different way than Ko Moon-young, but like
Right.
he has a very big personality. He
Mhm.
tones that down in a way that is really nice. For
Mm.
that's not the best word for it, but like he tones it down in the way that he like is sort of pursuing Juri in a way that's really respectful and really
Right.
like
Mhm.
it's just really comforting to watch, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good way. I think comforting is a good word for kind of the development of their relationship. Like even by the end of the show, they just hold hands sitting on a stair, right?
I'm
There's
not even
no
sure if they hold hands if their hands are just touching on the stoop.
oh yeah.
It's like not I wish we had had a little bit more at the end there from them, if I'm being
That's
honest.
fair. But if we're thinking about them as a foil to our A couple has a lot of like very steamy, you
Mhm.
know, hot moments that we did not talk about those. We did not talk about any of those.
That might actually be a good place to sort of wrap up, because
Okay.
I think as has previously been stated, I have now seen 22 K-dramas, and my favorite kiss that I've seen is in this show.
Oh, speak on it, because you watched a show that was supposed to have the best kiss in all of K-drama.
Yeah, so the one that like people are very into is in What's Wrong with Secretary Kim. But for me, that's even though that kiss was very hot, there like there wasn't enough like emotional weight behind it for me, and that there's
Oh,
in a way that
okay.
there's so much emotional weight in this show that like it's almost more cathartic when Ko Min-young and Moon Gang-tae finally like kiss. So something also to know about K-dramas is a lot of the time they do not show very much PDA on screen. Like
Oh, okay.
particularly and this doesn't apply here, but like particularly when they have younger actors that are like in their late teens or early 20s, they will maybe have like a peck. And like that
Hmm.
is like peak romance for those shows. So like this there's not that like what we see maybe 4 or 5 kisses in total with Ko Moon-young and Moon Gang-tae, like which
Yeah.
is really not that many when you think about that there's what 16 plus hours of a romance.
Mm-hmm.
But like my favorite my favorite kiss scene in this show,
Mm-hmm.
it's a little over halfway through. So like their first kiss is almost very like not naive. That's
Chaste.
very chaste.
It's a
It's
peck.
very sweet. But then there's like there's a whole dramatic situation where they're like not talking, and Ko Moon-young is trying to get Gang-tae to talk to her, and he has like cut her off. But then he thinks that she's in danger, so he rushes like to her big creepy house, uh, to like
It is a big creepy house.
to make sure she's okay, and
Mhm.
she is. But then like he goes to leave again, and she's like, "Wait, am I like did you didn't come because you missed me? You just came for like these other reasons?" And then she
Mhm.
like gets really upset about it, I think justifiably so, and then sort of like storms off. But then so he to her bedroom, and then he comes in and is like we need to talk, and then she gets really upset and is like yelling at him again, and they have this not mantra, that's not precisely what I mean, but like he's asked her like, before you do something impulsive, because so much of her journey is learning how not to be so impulsive, it's like at least count to 3.
Right. And that was actually in the first episode. The screen cap, I think this is very interesting. For when you like find it on Netflix, the screen cap that they show you is the moment where, or was it episode 2? It might have been episode 2.
I think it's episode 2. And it has like the butterfly hug as well.
Yeah. Is when he talks to her about that and teaches her about the butterfly hug to help her calm down, and counting to 3. So this is I don't want to say a motif. That's not the right thing. It's a thing. Could I say motif?
Let's call it a motif.
It's a motif that appears throughout the 16 episodes. There's constantly this conversation of count to 3 before you do something impulsive. But this one has a fun twist on it. He says to count to 3 when she's yelling at him to do something impulsive.
She's yelling at him that like, because she got a cut on her hand from the circumstances that she's in, and he like bandages her hand, and then she's like, I don't know, why are you doing this? Like, this doesn't even hurt. Like, the things that you said to me were much more hurtful than this. Like, but then he's like, okay, well, like count to 3. And then I know the first time we were watching this, I was like, okay, well, like, she's not doing anything impulsive. She's just yelling. And she yells all the time. So like, what is he talking about?
But also she was right to be mad in that moment. You know, so I was like, why are you telling her to count to 3, bro? That's kind of rude, and she's allowed to express her feelings. But then he starts, I think on 3,
so
he says it with her.
She counts to 3 very slowly. And then on 3, he says it like, I think a split second after she does. And then he kisses her.
He was the one counting down because he was going to do something impulsive, and then they were going to kiss. And it was like, it was fangirling, bring it down a little bit. But it was a really, really good kiss. And it was, compared to like the peck, it was very passionate. And I think the camera work here also was very, very well done. The way that we were moving around them as a couple, how we weren't like too close, if that makes sense.
Well, and it's also very interesting, and that, well, first of all, that Moon Gang-tae is the one to like make the move here, when Ko Moon-young is normally the one always going for it, which like I'm totally cool with. But like they're flipping that script here. But they're also doing really interesting things with like height, because they start out kneeling on the bed, or she's sitting on the bed and he's kneeling, and then he sort of like lifts her up so she's higher than he is, because she's not short. She's like she's of reasonable height. He's very tall. But like they play a lot with height here, where she is higher than him. Yeah.
And something that I don't power dynamics between the couple is very interesting, and playing with height and who is in the position of over versus under, I think is really interesting to think about with them as a couple. And I do think it is important that while Ko Moon-young is aggressive, let's say, where she's the one that's like, give me a son, and when they
also like one of my favorite things that she says is like, I'm horny, I admit that.
But I think it's important for their relationship that when they do have these moments, when they're kissing or when they are more intimate, it's Gang-tae meeting her there. So it doesn't feel like she's forcing herself on him.
Well, and also it's, even though Gang-tae is like perhaps more pushing things here, he is still making sure she's into it.
Right. Of course. Something, rewinding just a little bit, thinking about Quarantine Book Club again, that your student said is, if these were flipped roles, if Gang-tae was a woman and Moon-young was a man, there would be a lot, we would have to, not have to, but the power dynamics could potentially be a lot more uncomfortable with the way that she pursues him and the way that she chases him down and stalks him, etc. That
also, to be clear, when she like follows him to the hospital, that is also the hospital where her father is a patient. So she's not just hanging around a hospital where she has no business being.
Yes, no, that's very fair.
We should give her a little bit more credit.
No, absolutely. But I mean, as you said, it's supposed to be uncomfortable, right? So I do think the series creators are playing around with how we think about power and how we think about power dynamics. Because even in their last kiss sequence in episode 16, she is taller than him with the heels that she's wearing.
And she's like standing on a step.
Oh.
And then he like picks her up and like sits her on the table. Anyway, I've seen this too many times.
I mean, that is also a very, very good kiss sequence.
Oh, it is a very close second. But I think with the first one, there's just so much like pent up that when they finally, because like it's not until like episode 10 and like like in Crash Landing on You, we get like our first kiss in episode 3 and then our first real kiss in like episode 5, and like I had to wait till like episode 10 or 11 for this one, and it was a very long time.
Yeah, but it was worth the wait.
Oh, definitely worth the wait.
Very well paced. But yeah. So great kiss sequences. That's our review of It's Okay. But did you have any kind of last thoughts or feelings?
Just that It's Okay to Not Be Okay is a great K-drama, and if you are interested in watching them, it is a great place to start.
Yeah. And there's so much that we were not able to cover and think about here. So actually, this is a great way or place to plug one of the little things we do on our Instagram account. So if you go to our Instagram account, Sex Love Lit, all one word, we have these little posts that are called Pillow Talk posts. And pretty much what those are for is if there's something that we didn't cover in the episode or something that you're like, you know what, these girls got it wrong, this is the place to do it and to talk about it and have the discussion with us. So make sure you check out our Instagram at Sex Love Lit and check out our Pillow Talk posts. We'll probably post the one for this episode at the time when it goes live, so you'll have access to that. And you can also follow us on Twitter, which is also at Sex Love Lit. And let's see, is there anywhere else we are? I mean, you could email us if you want to. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. What are we going to be talking about next time, Corinne?
Next time, we'll be talking about Schitt's Creek.
Yay! So I have been powering through Schitt's Creek, which I know I said making a commitment to a show is a lot, but I'm on season 6 now, and I doubt I will take more than a week and a half to finish it. But we are going
to the whole show in its entirety, not season 6.
Oh,
not just season 6. Yeah.
But we are going to be doing for our next episode something a little different. We are going to do a deep dive into a single episode of the show. So if you have any thoughts about which episode we should talk about, feel free to let us know. Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for tuning in. And remember, it's okay to not be okay.
Title drop. Is that what we want? All right, so this has been Sex Love Literature. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite platform of choice, be that Spotify or iTunes or even Google Podcasts. We're there as well.
And we will see you next time
on Sex Love Lit. Yay! All right.
Bye,
everyone.